We all knew Norfolk State women's basketball would have a higher than usual seed in the NCAA tournament. Now that the results are in, we see the seeding is literally historic. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you put down your first $5 winning bet. We'll wrap up today's episode with the decision by the MEAC tournament to finish with Norfolk State versus Howard women's basketball. I think that was a bold and correct move. In segment 2, Norfolk State men's basketball believes that them not getting the 16 seed is a travesty. I don't agree with that. I think that is reality. Let's break that down in segment 2, but kick it off with the historic seeding of Norfolk State women's basketball, who has the highest seed that they have ever had in program history. The Norfolk State women's basketball team has been ranked or is going to be the number 13 seed in their bracket, and they'll be going up against number 4 Maryland. This is a huge deal before the game. This is a huge deal leading into the game as well. Lately, I've been making the distinction between those two aspects because sometimes we have storylines that really don't matter once the game gets tipped off or kicked off or whatever you want to say, the first pitch. Some of those things don't matter once we get into the actual game play. This one does. This one is relevant for not only as we lead into the days going into that game, but then also the the 40 minutes of action that we will get as well. The reason that this is big for Norfolk State is they've never been a 13 seed. In their history, they have never been a 13 seed. I was actually pretty surprised. That's the second highest or fourth, depending how you count ties, right? So I guess fourth highest that an HBCU has ever been. You've had 3 12 seeds. I was more surprised to hear that. I thought that there was a chance that the Spartans could make their way up to a 12 seed. I thought that was a really big if. It takes a lot to get that done. I thought that they had done enough to where it was a possibility. They ended up landing at a 13 seed. And like I said, this is the highest that this program has ever been in their school's history. This is the highest that any HBCU team has been since 2014 when Hampton did it as a 12 seed. So this is rare. Okay. I know I mentioned that you had 3 12 seeds, but one was 2014. The other two were literally last century, not even just last decade, last century. So it's a very rare thing that you see an HBCU be ranked this high. And we're going to talk about seeding a lot this segment and next segment because the men's team believes that they were snubbed. They believe that it was a travesty. And we're going to get into all of those things, such as net rankings. And I want to bring up the net rankings because on the women's basketball side, golly, talk about taking care of business. The way that Norfolk State set up their schedule, you have quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, quad 4. You have those things that make up the net. And some of these aspects don't make a lot of sense to me, but I understand that quad 1 is the highest and quad 4 is the lowest. And most of your conference games are going to be quad 4 victories. Okay. You had 6 total games for Norfolk State that fell between quad 1, 2, and 3. You went 0-2 in quad 1. You went 2-0 in quad. No, you went 0-1 and 0. No, you went 2-0 in quad 1, 2-0 in quad 2, and then you went 1-1 in quad 3. I had to make sure those numbers was right because I was adding it up and it wasn't hitting 6 in my brain, but I think I was just triple and quadruple guessing myself unnecessarily. But anyway, so you went 0-2 in quad one, which was surprising because I thought that either that Auburn or that Missouri victory would have fell in quad one. And had it fell in quad one, I'll say this, had either Missouri or Auburn had fell in a quad one victory, we probably would be talking about Norfolk State as a 12 seed. Honestly, we talk about them being a 12 seed. And I think the hypotheticals that surround this basketball team, they're interesting to at least me. They're fascinating to me. They make my brain wonder a little bit. And I'll get to another one in a second. But over the season, you went 3-3 in quad 1-3 victories. That's a big deal. That's why you are able to sit here as a 13 seed. That's really tells the whole story of it all. Because had you just dominated the MEAC, I think you still could have got to a 14. I'll be honest with you, because one thing we see is respect factor of do it again. We want to see people who can do it repeatedly, because the net isn't just, all right, net rankings, boom, that's what we're going to do. It's not just that. It's other metrics that they've added this year that are still kind of confusing, such as the WAB, wins across bubble. Some of this stuff is just kind of, it's unfounded territory. They're still trying to make it a little bit more clear and make it more understandable and digestible to people like me, who I'm not an expert at this at all. So they still have to make these things a tad bit more digestible. But in general, you're looking at the hypothetical of, or excuse me, you're looking at the victories in the out of conference schedule that instantly elevate what Norfolk State has been. And we talked about this countless times, but knocking off 2 SEC schools in addition to knocking off Wyoming, those elevated, man. They were top 5 mid-major for a long time. We knew how good the Norfolk State was, which brings me to my other hypothetical. I wonder, being a 13 seed, I wonder if they would have lost in the finals, not anywhere else in the tournament, but in the finals. I wonder if they would have still made it, because they were ranked so high. So I wonder if they would have been able to sneak in as a 16 seed. That's a little bit interesting to me. I don't know. I don't know how to weigh that hypothetical, but dropping from a 13 to completely out feels like a large drop. Feels like a large drop. I wonder if they would have made it even if they hadn't beaten Howard in that game. I don't know. But the reason that this is huge, the reason that this matters is seeding impacts who you go against. Duh, that's obvious. But the truth of the matter is, I often look at the smaller mid-majors who get these very low seeds. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. Oh, they're not that good. Then they go to the 16 seed. I see, told you they're not that good. But the truth is, yes, there's a lot of parity in the game. But being a number 1 seed means you are one of the top 4 schools in the country. In the country. You should be making it far. Elite 8, Sweet 16. Like, that's what we are expecting from you. Then you have this school that's 64th. Well, yeah, they're probably going to beat them. I don't care who it is. You take the first of anything. You take the top 4 of anything, and you put a 64-man, woman, team, animal. I don't care what it is. Top 4 versus the bottom 4 of a 64 entity bracket. Yes, the top 4 is going to beat the bottom 4 9 out of 10 times. But when it comes to these small schools, it's used as proof that these teams aren't that good. I think it's a very self-fulfilling prophecy where, oh, well, they ain't that good. See, boom, that happened. But it's a rare. You're not giving them a true chance to succeed. Occasionally it does happen, but there's a reason that it's not frequent. And that's not an HBCU thing. It isn't. It simply isn't. You take, I don't know how many are in everything, are in all of these schools, but you take 64 high majors. I bet you the top 4 will beat the bottom 4 9 out of 10 times, maybe 8 out of 10 times. But with Norfolk State being a 13 seed, they have a way better chance of knocking off a 4. A way better chance of knocking off a 4 seed. And that's what this opportunity of seeding gives you. It always makes it, it's not going to make it easy, but it does make it easier. And I think that at the end of the day, that is what is the most important, is trying to get a victory. And being a 13 seed gives you a much better chance at solidifying that victory than you would have had if you were a 16 seed. It just does. You're not facing one of the 4 best. You're probably facing somebody a little bit closer. And when it comes to Norfolk State, they have the confidence of saying, I beat Missouri and I beat Auburn. I beat Missouri and I beat Auburn. Let's see what Auburn's women basketball record is. Oh, they weren't that good. I'll say that. They were not that good. They were 14 in the tournament. And let's see what Missouri was. Missouri was 15. They weren't that good either. I see why they required 2 victories. But still, the truth is there. The proof is in the pudding. That confidence is there to know that I've knocked off a team in the SEC before. I don't need to sit there and try to, oh man, can we do it? We've done it this year. Literally, it's not even just the coaches done it. We have all done it. Not pieces of the team have done it. We have all done it. That's the beautiful part. I might have just stumbled into this, but that is the most beautiful part about going into the tournament for Norfolk State women's basketball is that they've done this already. They knocked off Missouri, they knocked off Auburn, and it's not like, oh, let's rely on Diamond Johnson's experience. Let's rely on Kiera Wheeler's experience. Let's sit the young people down and say, hey, look at what they do. This is how you prepare. Everybody in this team, coaches and players, went through the preparation process to knock off a Missouri, to knock off an Auburn. So when it comes to playing Maryland, they're probably thinking to themselves, let's do that again. We already know the process and how to get to this position. We all know it. We all need to do it. I love that. I love that. I didn't even think about it really, but there we have it. Anywho, segment 2, we're going to push forward and we're going to look at Norfolk State men's basketball because they feel like they were snubbed. Matter of fact, Coach Jones said it was a travesty. I don't agree with that, but I want to break down some of his quotes and give my opinion as well because they ended up being a 16 seed, and that would have been what he called a travesty. Today's episode is brought to you by Factor, and eating healthy doesn't have to be complicated. With Factor, you can get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. Oh, we all know it can be a hassle, and sometimes that hassle keeps people from even wanting to get into the kitchen and make something healthier. It's way easier to go out and grab something fast that is not healthy. Well, here we go. You have the complaint of time preparation out of the way. The benefits of health all right here. Everything you need comes with Factor. Factor offers smoothies, breakfast, snacks, so you always have something nutritious, ready to go. A variety and taste. They have the Korean beef bowl and the creamy Parmesan chicken. Those are some of my favorites, personally. They taste homemade and they take absolutely no effort. So you go ahead and go to factormeals.com/factor podcast and use the code Factor Podcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's Factor Podcast at factormeals.com/factor podcast. Today's episode is also brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're into plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources, that latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast and from coast to coast. You need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Basketball. It's March Madness time, and this is the one-stop shop for everything you need around the tournament and its biggest teams and potential upset candidates going into the big dance. Norfolk State is hoping that they can be an upset candidate. That goes for both the men's and the women's, but we've already talked about the ladies. Now let's talk about the dudes. Norfolk State not getting a 15 seed is not a travesty to me. It's reality. And I don't mean because it's actually happened. I think that this is the reality of the situation that you are in. Now, after the MEAC championship, head coach Robert Jones said, if we get a 16, it'll obviously be a travesty. Obvious? I definitely don't agree with that. It's not obvious. I can hear arguments and I've looked at things and I can understand why he should feel like he would get a 15 seed. I don't necessarily share that opinion, but I understand it. Obvious? Yeah, that's where you kind of lose me on it. And I get it. To a point, it feels like you're advocating for your school. But I'm going to break down some more things. So let me just kind of take a step back and give you the rest of his quotes, because Norfolk State did end up getting that 16 seed. So it was obviously a travesty to the mind of Robert Jones. He says, for a while, we were trending toward a 14 seed. We lost 2 out of our last 3 games. So I know we're not a 14 seed by any means, but I don't think we should be a 16. At the very least, we should be a 15. We should not look up and be a 16. I mean, if you're going to make us a 16, you might as well put us in the playing game, because at least you have a chance to win that game and keep the journey going. There's a lot of things to unpack there. But now let's get into my opinion on it, because I didn't see 14 seed. I didn't. Norfolk State lost early in conference play. And I kind of feel like the track record of seeding, you need to be really dominant. And I mean, arguably, they hadn't won the tournament in 2 years. And I just mentioned how with the women, when you do it repeatedly, you tend to get that benefit of the doubt. Norfolk State doesn't have that on the men's side. So you tend to have to go undefeated to get outside of a 15 seed. To get a 14 seed, you typically have to be dominant, and dominant to the point where you don't lose any games in conference play. That's the way that I tend to look at it. So the whole 14 seed, I don't know if that's him saying that's where I feel like we were going, or if that's him saying I was looking at the numbers and that's where we were headed. That was our trajectory. Now, one's based in fact, one based in feelings. Mine is based solely in feelings. So if he has the fact, I mean, I don't know if there's any way to track that now or trace that now, but if it's a fact they were headed towards the 14 seed, then I actually agree with him now that they should be a 15. But my opinion is, after you lost that first game and went on your little run, I kind of viewed you as being a potential 15 seed. So when you lose those last 2 games, I'm dropping you from 15 to 16. So in his mind, I was a 14, dropped from 14 to 15. We look at the last stretch of the season the same way. It knocks down the Spartans one notch. The only difference is where our starting point was. With my starting point being lower than his, of course, my end result is going to be lower than his. Another thing that Coach Jones mentions is that they knocked off High Point, who is a 13 seed, and he knocked off Alabama State, who is a playing team. I do think the High Point victory is impressive. I do think that is something that you should praise, right? That showed a quality out-of-conference schedule victory. Alabama State, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I don't think that I'm bragging about that. Even if you beat them by a wide margin. Hey, man, we beat them by buku. Like, it was 17 points. Nah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's not impressive to me. That's not something I'm going to hang my hat on. This team that's a playing, we beat them badly. Okay. So are you saying that essentially because you beat them badly, y'all shouldn't be on the same level? I can understand the thought process, but we need something a little bit more, in my opinion, to level up to being a 15 seed. Because y'all are technically on different levels. They're a playing team. You are a 16 seed. Now, yes, if they win their playing game, they're a 16 seed. But even he makes this distinction of saying, might as well put us in the playing game, because we understand that is different. That is different. That is sincerely a different category, in my opinion. I know they both have 16 next to their number or next to their name, but I do not view those as being the same thing in the slightest, in my opinion, at least. I don't know where you stand on it, but I don't view those as being the same. But to me, in general, I think that High Point is a good feather in your cap on your resume, and I think that you could lean into that a little bit, but you just didn't do a lot. Like, I don't think you have a high-profile victory outside of High Point, and you lost 3 games in conference play. That's going to knock you down. Like, 3 losses in conference play, I've always looked at it as this. You lose 3 in conference play, it's wraps for you. You lose 3 in conference play, it is wraps for you hoping to be a 15 seed. I think that High Point is what kept them from being a playing team. If they would have not beaten High Point, you probably would have seen them in the first 4. Let me not call it a play-in. Let me call it what it's called on college level. It is called the first 4. And even he says, look, that would have been better because at least we would have won a game. He understands the insurmountable odds, or the odds. I'm going to call them insurmountable, but he understands the odds that you're up against. They got to play Florida. Jay Willis just picked Florida to win it all over Duke. And he's a Dookie to death. And he picked Florida. So that tells you just how good that Florida is. It's going to be a tall task. Going to be a tall task. But I think that a 15 seed is where they were going to be. This is not a travesty. This is a realistic situation. You look at the net rankings, and this is something that is used heavily. Now, Norfolk State has a solid net ranking for a 16 seed. I think I read that they have the best one of all 16 seeds, which includes the play-in squads as well. But look at the 15 seeds. Norfolk State is at 180. They're like 180. Robert Morris, 139. Bryant, 141. Omaha, 160. Wofford, 131. They're 20 apart from the next closest guy. And they're really 40, or they're really about 50 apart from the top end, 40 apart. Let's just say 40. They're about 40 apart from the majority of those teams. Now, I would look at a Bryant and say, oh, they had no quad 1, no quad 2 victories. They went 3-2 in quad 3. And most of their wins came in quad 4, which is similar to Norfolk State. But Norfolk State actually has a quad 2 victory. And I will point at them, but then their net ranking is a 141. And you know what this comes down to? And this is the part where I lean so heavily into the whole reality of it, because we have to be honest. We have to be real. These conferences, the SWAC and the MEAC, are looked down upon because they don't have a lot of success out of conference. And I get the reasons that these things happen, money and all of that. But I can't use the reasons that there is a gap to act like the gap doesn't exist. I can't do that. In net ranking as a conference, the MEAC and SWAC rank at the bottom. The last two, literally, they make up the last two net rankings as a conference. We can't sit here and act like it doesn't matter, because I come from a football background. Let me sit back and go back to my home base for a second. If we talking about FBS, we talking about top 25. We don't even respect victories by teams if they're over teams that are not in the top 25. The idea that quality of opponent doesn't matter is a lie. We can't keep up this narrative. Now, we can feel good about our teams. I don't want to take that away from you. But how many of these teams are you really feeling good about in each conference? A handful max. You go through the SWAC, you go through the MEAC, there's not many schools that you're feeling great about. And it doesn't bring me joy to say this, but we have to be realistic. I'm tired of hearing this. Like, he's talking about, is it MEAC, HBCU bias? Yes. When Robert Jones asks, is the seeding a result of MEAC and SWAC bias? Yes, it is. Because when you look around those conferences, how many real competitors do you feel like you see on a week-to-week basis? And those things matter. In every aspect of sports that I've ever dealt with. NFL, you ain't really going against no playoff teams. You beat a bunch of bottom feeders. You're in a bad division. We don't really trust you going into the playoffs. Like that's a real thing in the NFL. You have a bad division. You beat up on the teams in your division. When we get to the playoffs, we don't believe in you. Does it affect their seeding? No, because it's simply based on record in that level. But if it was based on how we feel about the team, those winners of poor divisions would be at the bottom of the playoff bracket. You go to the NBA. People want to say, oh, yeah, they're number one seed. We even say, wait to the playoffs. Wait till people are at their highest. Wait till we're seeing all the best teams. Oh, you're a top fledgling or you're a top-notch team, but you ain't beating the top 3. Like when we see a 1 seed versus a 3 seed in the regular season, we want to see how that game plays out, because that's how we dictate how we feel about these schools. You go to the college football ranks, the top 25 example that I just gave. We want to see how do you play against teams that are really in the top 10. There's examples where that isn't used. There's exceptions, because like say Alabama is 15 or something and they're not a top 10 team. It's still Bama. So you're going to get a little bit of a nod for that. Not the typical Bama nod, but you're going to get a little bit of a nod for defeating Bama in a down season because they're Bama. But we have to be realistic, ladies and gentlemen. We have to be realistic. This gap exists, and the gap should have repercussions. Unless you don't think the gap exists, we can't sit here and be like, oh, yeah, we got one or two teams that might be all right. That should be enough. It's not. It never will be. It never will be in a division that is, or a conference that is that deep. Divisions have 4 teams in them. So yeah, 1 or 2, you're solid because you got 2 good teams. But in a conference, no. This is how it is in all sports. And I understand that we don't like the gap exists, but man, I'm not finna sit here and act like it doesn't. We literally give reasons on why the gap exists. So we all know it exists. We all know that it's real. Do we think that there shouldn't be any repercussions for it? Because there's no precedent in sports for that being the case. The net rankings are the net rankings, and Norfolk State is lower than all of the 15 seeds. They're better than all the 16 seeds, but they're worse on the net rankings than all of the 15 seeds. So I can't say that they were robbed. I can't say that it was a travesty. But let's push forward and look at very quickly, very briefly, on why I think deciding to go with Norfolk State versus Howard women's basketball as the finale of the MEAC tournament was the right call, as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and March Madness is here. If you want to solidify getting that $200 back in bonus bets, I will go get one of these top seeds versus one of these bottom seeds. It's going to be a wide spread, but I think that there's a good chance that they do end up covering that spread in most of those games. You go ahead and put down a $5 bet on that and it hits, you get $200 in bonus bets right back to you. It's simple. It's easy. It feels like a more sure thing, and now you get to lean into that. I'm just telling you how I would do it, but you ain't got to listen to me. Just go ahead and listen to me on this one aspect. Go to FanDuel.com. Enjoy your March Madness. Make a little bit of more money than you would just sitting on the couch by using FanDuel.com. Go ahead. New customers get $200 back in bonus bets if their first $5 bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. I'm still trying to get used to my new little sign in. I don't know if it's sign in, but whatever. I'm still trying to get used to my little introduction that I be doing, so sometimes I might mess up. But one thing that wasn't a mess up, one thing that wasn't a mistake is the decision to go with Norfolk State versus Howard women's basketball as the finale. It is rare. It is very rare, at least in my knowledge, that you would go with the women to close, because 9 times out of 10 in sports that involve men and women, the men are the main attraction. That's how it's always been. And there's rare examples when that is not the case. And most times when that isn't the case, it's not the same thing at stake. That's the other thing. See, I come from, look, y'all know my background in sports is different. Basketball isn't one of my core sports that I grew up on. But I did grow up on football and combat sports. Obviously, I can't lean into my football side here because it doesn't make sense. You don't even have cards like that. There are no main events. That doesn't exist in football, right? But you look at a WrestleMania, you look at a UFC pay-per-view, and look, you're not going to see many times where the women are the main event. But if it is the biggest event on that stage, you are going to make them the main event because it's just logical. The thing is, you can take a Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks, for example. Recently, there was an episode of Raw in which you had a title match between Rhea Ripley and Io Sky. I'm naming names, and for people who aren't into wrestling, it probably doesn't matter. But the point is, these are 2 high-profile matchups. One was a pay-per-view. One was a weekly programming. But the truth is, even in weekly programming, you don't have it happen. Most time, the women are not the biggest story or the biggest draw. That was the case when you look at Howard versus Norfolk State. At the end of the day, this was the main event. This is what we all wanted to see. I don't know if they already had it scheduled this way. If it was, hey, blessings. That is a very fortuitous schedule. Because if it hadn't happened that way, I surely would have flipped script. I'm telling you right now, I would have flipped script and went to Norfolk State versus South Carolina State, because that's another big time matchup. Those are the two, I don't want to say hottest teams, but those are the two top teams that are in the conference. So when you're looking at Norfolk State versus South Carolina State, there's a draw there. Co-champions facing off against each other in the NCAA or in the MEAC tournament finals. It made a lot of sense. But they made a bold decision to say, no, we are going to prioritize our women. I was talking to Mason Smith about it, friend of the show, and he was talking about how on the high school level, they never schedule the girls game before the boys game. And because a lot of times you're not going to have as many people stay. Like, that's just the truth of the matter. Attendance has been bad, and that's a conversation that is had frequently. But I think you knew in this situation, there's a better chance that people walked out of Norfolk State versus South Carolina State than there was Norfolk State versus Howard. We've been building up to this all year. Matter of fact, we've been building up to this for the last 3 years, and we've gotten it in the finals all 3 years. I don't even know what it feels like to watch a team other than Norfolk State or Howard be competing for that NCAA tournament victory or bid, excuse me. I don't even know what that feels like. So this was the event that everybody wanted to see. Everybody wanted to see Howard versus Norfolk State. We wanted to see for the third time, would this finally be the opportunity that Howard needed? Would they, on the biggest of all the stages you could have this game, come out with a victory? And I don't know if it would have felt like an upset. It would have felt like an upset. Like, could they pull off an upset? As disrespectful as that sound, right? But could they pull it off? And that's what people wanted to see. No one has been able to touch these women at all the entirety of the season. No MEAC school has defeated either one of them other than Norfolk State knocking off Howard. So we wanted to build to this. We did. We'd have been shocked if we didn't get it, and we got it. So you better believe that it was the main event. You better believe it was the main attraction. You better believe this is what the people wanted to see. So put it as the main event of the evening. I loved it. I loved the decision. And you could have played it safe and said, hey, typically that's not how we do it. The men are going to go up last, but not this time. I thought it was a bold move. I thought it was the correct move. I don't know how far in advance they had that scheduled, but it was the right call to make. Now, on tomorrow's episode, we will talk about Aaron Smith, the forgotten prospect. But like I said, bold move for Norfolk State women's basketball to highlight and main event the MEAC tournament. So I thought we open up the week with them as well in the history that they made. Tomorrow, we'll talk about Aaron Smith as well as Alabama State and Southern, who won the SWAC MEAC, or the SWAC men's and women's tournament. So in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.